The house was quiet that Friday night, the kind of silence you can feel pressing against your ears. My parents were at the Shore House for the weekend, my brother in Baltimore for a work conference. I had the place to myself. After a brutal day at work, I wanted nothing more than a shower, a late dinner, and an early night. By 11:30 p.m., I was sprawled on the bed in the upstairs guest room, book in hand, the soft hum of the night air drifting through the slightly cracked window. I had almost forgotten how peaceful this place could be when everyone else was gone. That peace shattered in an instant. The low mechanical groan of the garage door sliced through the stillness, followed by the deep vibration that shook the floor beneath me. It wasn't a sound I could mistake for anything else. I'd been living in this room for months, directly above the garage. My heart began pounding before my brain could catch up. No one was supposed to be home. No one. My parents wouldn't be back until Sunday night. My brother wasn't due until the next afternoon. I threw the blankets aside and hurried to the window overlooking the driveway. The garage door was fully open, but the darkness was too heavy to make out whether a car had pulled in. Maybe it was nothing. A glitch in the opener? My father's old remote going off by accident? But a cold weight settled in my chest as logic sank its claws in. The garage only opened by pressing the wall button inside, or through the remote in my car, the one my dad had programmed years ago. And my car was parked outside in the driveway, unlocked. Somebody had to have been inside it. I yanked open my closet and reached for the aluminum baseball bat my parents had tossed in there years ago. My palms were already sweating as I crept toward the stairs. Every creak of the wooden steps made me grit my teeth. Halfway down, I froze. Voices. They were faint but unmistakable, two male voices, low, deliberate, coming from the direction of my parents' bedroom. I couldn't make out words, but the sound of drawers sliding open, hangers scraping on closet rods, told me enough. They were looking for something. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed 911, whispering my address to the operator. She told me to stay hidden, to remain quiet, but adrenaline drowned her words. I couldn't just sit there. This was my home. My family's home. Gripping the bat tighter, I edged down the hallway, every step deliberate. My pulse was so loud in my ears I almost missed the sound of something metallic clattering onto the floor in my parents' room. I didn't wait. With a burst of reckless energy, I shouted at the top of my lungs and charged through the doorway. Two men whipped around, eyes wide. One was tall and thin, wearing a dark hoodie. The other, stockier, stood with a jewelry box in his hand. Both looked like they hadn't expected anyone to be here, let alone someone ready to fight. I swung for the closer one, the bat connecting solidly with his thigh. He stumbled back, cursing, before collapsing to the floor. The second man didn't hesitate. He barreled toward me, shoulder first, knocking the wind out of me as we hit the carpet hard. My bat clattered away. He was heavier, stronger. His hands closed around my throat like steel clamps. I clawed at his arms, desperate for air, when I saw the first man crawling toward us, something glinting in his hand. A knife. And in that instant, I knew I had made a mistake. A stupid, deadly mistake. The air around me felt thinner. My vision narrowed. A horrible calm settled over me, the thought forming clear as glass. This is it. I'm going to die here. Then, faintly, sirens. The man choking me glanced toward the window. The first one froze mid-crawl. Then, without a word, they both bolted. The stocky one grabbed my bat, swung it once, and the world went black. When I opened my eyes, there was a police officer kneeling beside me, his hand on my shoulder. "You with me? Can you hear me?" I nodded weakly, my skull pounding. The door to the backyard stood open, curtains flapping in the warm night air. The intruders were gone. Paramedics insisted I go to the hospital, but I refused. I gave the officers every detail I could remember, the voices, their build, their clothing. As they left to search the neighborhood, one thought gnawed at me. They knew too much. They knew the garage opener was in my unlocked car. They knew my parents were away. They knew my brother was out of town. This wasn't random. This was personal. It was a quiet Wednesday evening in late summer, the kind of night where the air feels heavy and slow. I'd been back in my hometown for a few months now, living in a small duplex about 20 minutes from my mother's house. She was getting older, stubborn as ever, and lately she'd been having health issues, nothing immediately life-threatening, but enough to keep me on edge. A couple of falls. A hip replacement earlier that year. Every time the phone rang after dark, I braced myself for bad news. That night, I was on the couch watching TV when my phone lit up with a local number I didn't recognize. Something about it, maybe the fact that it wasn't spammy looking, made me answer. "Hello?" The woman on the other end spoke quickly, in a clipped, professional tone. She said she was a nurse at a nearby hospital. My mother, she explained, had been brought in about an hour ago after a fall. She'd hit her head. She was conscious but asking for me. I didn't question it for a second. The woman rattled off my mother's full name, her street address, even mentioned the hip surgery she'd had in March. Every detail was correct. She told me I should get there quickly. My stomach sank. My mind jumped into overdrive, picturing her alone, scared, hooked up to machines. I didn't even think about locking the door. I just grabbed my keys, slammed the front door behind me, and tore down the road. The drive to the hospital was a blur of red lights and worst-case scenarios. I ran through them all: brain bleed, broken bones, long-term care. My hands gripped the wheel until my knuckles turned white. When I burst into the ER and told the nurse at the reception desk who I was and why I was there, she frowned. She tapped at her keyboard, scanning the patient list. Then she looked up at me. "There's no one by that name admitted tonight," she said gently. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "No, there has to be. I just got a call." She fell. Hit her head. The nurse. She shook her head. "I'm sorry. She's not here. Are you sure you have the right hospital?" I stepped back, my pulse pounding. My phone felt heavy in my hand. I excused myself, walked outside, and called my mother's landline. She answered after 2 rings, her voice groggy. "Hello? What's wrong?" I swallowed. Nothing. Just checking in." "I was asleep," she said, confused. "Go back to bed," I told her, forcing calm into my voice. "I'll talk to you tomorrow." I hung up and stood there in the hospital parking lot, a sick realization spreading through me. It had been a setup. Someone had used my mother's medical history to lure me out of my house. I drove home fast, my anger rising with every mile. When I pulled into my driveway, the front door looked exactly the way I'd left it. For a fleeting second, I thought maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe nothing had happened. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew. The air felt wrong, still, like the house was holding its breath. The living room was stripped bare of my TV. My laptop was gone. Drawers were left open in the bedroom, the jewelry box empty. Then I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The framed family photos on my bookshelf had been emptied. The glass frames were still there, but the pictures themselves were gone. In the bathroom, the cabinet doors were open. My prescription bottles had been emptied and taken. This wasn't a smash and grab. This was deliberate. I called the police. When they arrived, I told them about the phone call, word for word. One officer's expression darkened as he listened. "They knew too much," he said. "This wasn't random. I already knew that." The only person who could have given out some of those details was my mother, and she had no memory of doing so. She had plenty of friends, though, and she liked to talk. I'd warned her before about sharing personal information, but she always laughed it off. After that night, she promised to be more careful. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. I couldn't stop thinking about the fact that they had taken things with almost no monetary value but deep sentimental weight. Photos. Medical information. my address, my habits. And the worst part? Whoever they were, they hadn't been caught. That meant they were still out there. Watching. Waiting. I bought a Ring camera the next day. But a camera won't stop someone who already knows everything about you. Thursday nights were usually uneventful. I'd make dinner, maybe watch something on Netflix, and head to bed before midnight. My little rented house sat in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where the loudest thing you'd hear was the hum of a lawnmower on a Saturday afternoon. That night, I was brushing my teeth when the pounding started. Not a knock. Not even a hard knock. This was pounding, heavy, rapid, violent, like someone was trying to break the door down. I froze, toothbrush still in my mouth. The pounding came again, rattling the screen door. My first thought was that maybe a neighbor was in trouble. My second was that I should grab something to defend myself. Instead, I stepped into the living room and peered toward the front window. The porch light was useless, casting more shadow than illumination. Against my better judgment, I opened the main door, keeping the screen door shut. The man standing there looked wrong. His hair was a mess, like he'd been sleeping outside. His clothes were wrinkled and stained. He paced as he spoke, his eyes darting everywhere. "This is my house," he barked, his voice trembling with anger. "You're trespassing. I live here." I blinked. "No, you don't. I rent this place." He cut me off, his tone rising. "Get out before I call the police." I thought he might be high, or in the middle of a mental health crisis. But then he said something that made the hairs on my arms stand up. He started describing the inside of the house. Not just vague guesses, specific details. How the master bedroom door banged into the toilet if you opened it too far. How the back door stuck unless you lifted it while turning the knob. Things no one could know without having lived here. My mouth went dry. I hadn't said a word yet, but he kept going. Then he reached into a folder and pulled out papers. It looked like a lease agreement, his name at the top, this address underneath. The date was from 6 months before I moved in. Next, he showed me pieces of mail addressed to him here. Then came the photos. I felt my stomach turn. These weren't grainy or fake looking. They were clear, recent looking shots of him inside my home. One showed him sitting on my couch, watching TV. Another had him cooking at my stove. Then one in the bedroom, my bedroom, lying on the bed I slept in. There were more. People I didn't recognize in my kitchen, laughing at the table. One picture, he claimed, was from the 4th of July, just a few months ago. In it, a woman I'd never seen took a selfie with him and others, fireworks boxes visible in the corner. But here's the thing, I had been home alone on the 4th of July. No one else had been in my house. My mind raced. Were these staged? Photoshopped? Or was I losing my grip on reality? I finally told him I was calling the police. That's when he changed. The rage vanished. He grew calm, almost polite. "Go ahead," he said, stepping away from the door. I watched him walk into the darkness until I couldn't see him anymore. When the police arrived, I explained everything. They glanced at my rental agreement but didn't seem concerned. They suggested I talk to my landlord to see if I could track down previous tenants. My landlord didn't know him. Neither did the people who'd lived here before me. They said they'd lived alone for 3 years and never had a roommate. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. I started to think maybe it was over. Then I came home one night to chaos. The front door was locked, but inside, everything was overturned, drawers dumped, cushions slashed, closet doors wide open. My electronics were still there. Jewelry untouched. It wasn't theft. It was a search. The police found no signs of forced entry. Whoever had done it had a key. My landlord changed every lock the next day and installed deadbolts. But the questions lingered. How did that man have such detailed knowledge of the house? How did he get photos that looked so recent? And how did he get a key? I didn't believe in the supernatural. Still don't. But late at night, when the house creaks and the shadows stretch long, I feel watched. Because somewhere out there, someone is certain this is still their home. For a long time, I tried to see each incident as an isolated nightmare. The garage break-in. The hospital call. The man at the door. But nightmares don't usually come in threes, each one more invasive, more personal than the last. And they don't leave you with the gnawing feeling that someone, somewhere, is still pulling the strings. The first incident, the burglars in my parents' house, should have been the scariest. Strangers inside the place I grew up, knowing exactly when I'd be alone, exactly how to get in. The police had chalked it up to coincidence, maybe someone watching the neighborhood. But when the hospital scam happened, I knew coincidence was dead. That nurse had rattled off details that weren't just accurate, they were intimate. Details you only get from a family member, a friend, or a very, very dedicated stalker. And then came the man at the door. His calm confidence. The papers. The photos that made my skin crawl. He didn't just think he lived in my house, he wanted me to believe it, too. Individually, each event had its own explanation. Together, they formed something darker. I started looking for the patterns. The timing was always deliberate. Late at night, when you're most vulnerable. Or at a moment when panic would override logic, like the hospital call. They knew my movements, my schedule, even my emotional pressure points. The thefts were never purely about valuables. Sure, they took electronics and jewelry, but they also took things that mattered in a different way: family photographs, prescription bottles, documents. They left me feeling stripped bare, not just robbed. And most unsettling of all, in every case, the intruder or scammer had accurate, current information about me or my family. They knew where I'd be, who would be home, details inside locked rooms. That didn't come from random surveillance. That came from inside. The police reports went nowhere. No arrests, no suspects. I asked about fingerprints, security footage, phone records. They told me the leads went cold fast. So I started making my own connections. I wrote everything down: names of people who knew my parents' schedule, friends who'd been in my house recently, acquaintances who had enough access to overhear things. The list was shorter than I expected. But short doesn't mean safe. Somewhere in that small circle was someone willing to break into homes, to lie, to scare, to toy with my sense of reality. The most disturbing thought was the possibility that it wasn't about theft at all. That the stolen items, the staged scenes, the bizarre confrontations, they were messages. Someone was showing me they could reach me anytime they wanted. That they could get inside my house, my life, my head. I started living differently. Locks changed twice. Security cameras inside and out. I stopped answering calls from unknown numbers. I left lights on when I went out, kept curtains drawn, checked every window twice before bed. And still, I'd catch little signs. A chair angled differently in the corner. A faint smell of cigarette smoke in the living room, and I don't smoke. Once, I came home to find the television on, tuned to a channel I never watch. The cameras never caught a thing. Friends told me I was paranoid. Maybe I am. But paranoia doesn't make the garage door open in the middle of the night. It doesn't fake hospital records or put strangers' photos in your bedroom. That's not paranoia. That's a pattern. Now, years later, the official word is still unsolved. The police moved on. Neighbors forgot. My parents don't talk about it. But I haven't forgotten. Because when you've seen the way someone can walk into your life, rearrange it, and vanish without a trace, you stop believing in coincidences. And deep down, I know this isn't over. Somewhere, someone is still watching. Waiting. Planning the next move. The only question is whether I'll see it coming, or if, this time, they'll make sure I don't.